So I'm delighted to welcome today, we have Paul Morrison, who is Chief Executive of the Planning Inspectorate at the Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities here in the United Kingdom. We have Joyce Dimmock, who is Permanent Secretary at the Ministry for National Heritage, the Arts and Local Government in Malta. Lovely to have you with us from Malta. We have Andrzej Rogaczewski, who is the CEO of Net Company. And we have Tamar Peterkop, who is Secretary of State at the Government Office in Estonia. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And as I say, we want to get to the audience questions. So without further ado, I'm going to invite you, Paul, to start with some very quick opening remarks. Sorry, I should have said as well before, this session is all about innovation in policy making. So it's all about kind of new ways of policy making. Did we learn anything from the period that we've just come out of, this kind of crisis period? And how is policy making changing and embracing some of these new innovative approaches?
That's brilliant, thank you. It's really nice to see everyone, lots of old friends. So I've been the Chief Executive of the Planning Inspectorate since December, and I haven't really had much time to do much innovation in policy making since I joined. The job I was doing before that was I was playing a leadership role on the UK's response to the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. And in particular, the bit that I was really responsible for was our response about how we in the UK were going to host people displaced by the war and refugees. And the reason I'm just mentioning it, because I think it's quite a rich theme for us to think around when we're thinking around innovation in policy making, because when confronted by the issue a year ago that we were all desperately, sad and surprised by, we were confronted by an immediate political situation that people in the UK wanted to do their bit at pace, have large numbers of people offered the opportunity to find refuge in our country. We were set by politicians, the officials in our department, really two parameters around that. One, we had, whatever we did, we had to do it safely, so that the safeguarding of those that we moved in this country were secured. And then secondly, that we had to make sure that people had somewhere to stay, a roof over their head when they arrived. And the reason I just wanted to throw it into the mix, and I'll come on to just some themes that we might want to explore in the questions, there was a very bureaucratic traditional government response that was one option available to us, which was to sign a contract with people in the region and to set up lots of caseworking functions and think about how you match people to accommodation in the UK and do it on a very statist model. What we actually did was create a model where members of the public came forward, they offered their rooms, people stayed, we in government built a platform and we put in place the checks to keep people safe. But actually we stepped back to quite a large degree, and 160,000 people are now here, and I think that I'm pretty confident that the innovation led to that. Where that leaves me is really in concluding my opening remarks. There were three things I reflect on in all of that I think we had. One, we were humble. So we didn't, in the central government, fall into the trap of thinking we had all the answers and we could design it ourselves. We opened the problem and brought the solutions in from outside. Secondly, trust and openness, absolutely critical, I think, to delivering in this space, because you can't be, you can't do that humility and openness without it. And then lastly, we took the right risks, I think, and we did that with ministers. And I think without, for me, innovation in policy without those three factors would have been very difficult. So that was my introduction.
Thank you so much, Paul. So really starting off with a concrete example, the Homes for Ukrainian scheme, as you said, that had to be done at pace, but it had to be safe and it had to be secure. And then some of the things that you said which worked well. So government kind of standing back and taking a bit of a hands-off approach, but also that openness and trust in the scheme, really, really important. Thank you so much, Paul. Joyce.
Hi.
Over to you.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be joining you on this panel for this conference. Public policy is my bread and butter, so to say. I've been in the public service for many decades, and I would like today to share with you some of the policies, and I will start with the one that is very, very actual even here. We have a free childcare policy in Malta that we are very proud of the results it has yielded. In fact, in a decade since 2011 data, and it was implemented in 2013, it has increased the female participation in the workforce by 20%. And this scheme was quite innovative when we implemented it, because it involved the private sector, it involved an element of technology that was both in the management of the system and also in the attendance and monitoring of the child in the care center. And it has released resources that we had previously not been able to tap. The female workforce that were graduates, we actually have more female graduates than males. And unfortunately, due to this lack of affordable childcare, they were not being in employment. So government in 2013 had this as one of its manifesto promises, which has now been streamlined. It includes this management platform for both the agency providing the management of the childcare, the private childcare centers who are partners in this, and the parents who are allotted a specific number of hours depending on their economic engagement in employment. And the children are regularly monitored by the regulator and even the centers, so that everybody gets a win-win. And we are very pleased that this was an innovative policy which needed some creative thinking, which proved to be cost-effective in the long run, because the economic return has been much more than the actual original investment. I am available to give you more information should anybody require it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, hugely topical, as you know, in the UK, just announced a policy to extend free childcare as well in the UK. So it'll be really interesting to hear whether some of the things that you've already tried and tested are also being considered here. As you say, the use of technology to get the platforms in place and working very closely between the public and the private sector. So really interesting. I'm sure there will be questions about that. And hopefully we are talking to the government in Malta to make sure that we don't make some of the mistakes that maybe you tried and tested. Thank you so much. Andre, over to you.
Thank you. Good to be here. So I represent a company with 7,500 employees that I founded myself, and we actually do a lot of government digitization. And I have to say that listening to those two examples, I think they really reflect where Europe and where UK is. I think there's naivety laws and innocence laws when it comes to technology and when it comes to policy making and innovation. Because just a few years ago, we all talked about disruption, we talked about singularity, and we desperately tried to find examples of how to use tech for tech's sake. And then on the other hand, we were still doing all the things we used to do. Administrate and run up, I mean, what these people are doing, working hard in order to make everything work, right? I think we're in a different situation now. Policy making is technology, and technology is policy making. Like, look at the COVID crisis and we have a crisis after a crisis situation all the time, and we have restrained budgets, and we all know that digitization is one of the most important answers to our struggles, but it's not easy. And I mean, the COVID pass, and also I think when you talk about the children benefit system, in Netherlands, the government had to resign because they didn't pay out children benefits the right way. The COVID pass that we did here in the UK as well, I was on the front page of the Daily Telegraph on a Sunday morning, which was not too nice, where it said, you know, Vikings stealing British privacy or something like that. And there was a photo of me there. And I was, what did we do wrong here? We just created the COVID pass so people could go to the stadium and watch a football game. So it just shows that digitization is no longer something on the side, it's a part of policy making. And I think in order to gain population's trust at the moment, we need to do some of the boring stuff right. Okay, so look at, for instance, Brexit. One of the most important things about Brexit, why did UK vote for Brexit? A lot of that was about immigration. If you look at immigration policies in the UK now and immigration policies in Europe right now, they're not that different. And what do people actually want in Europe? What do people want in the UK? And I actually live here most of the time. They want the same things. They just want to make sure that they're in control of who comes in, how they contribute. Do you have a working permit? Is it fair? Is it transparent? Are these systems working or are they not? If you don't believe they're working, you lose trust. If you don't have trust, into systems or government, then you lose everything. And I think for Europe and for UK especially, I mean, your ambitions are so high here. I mean, I read a newspaper article in Scandinavia yesterday where some of the politicians in Scandinavia said, all Danish and Swedish and Norwegian companies should go to the UK right now because this is where investments are going to be made when it comes to digitization because they need it so much. Take just a trade situation here. You want to trade with the world. Well, in EU, we just enforced one common customs code. So every piece of goods being transported across borders need to be digitized in the sense that you can see where it comes from, who actually delivered this thing. Is the truck gonna, make a wrong turn and then just go straight to Russia or wherever? We want to know everything. We want to trade digitally now, and you want to trade digitally with Europe and the rest of the world. So these custom systems need to be renewed. We have legacy systems that are more than 30, 40 years old. We have people, average age 75, maintaining some of these systems. Eventually, they will die. And we are getting older, but, we're sitting on a time bomb. You got a health sector where people don't want to work there. It's the same thing everywhere. People don't want to work in the health sector. We are getting older, and we have chronic diseases. Is digitization going to solve this for us? Probably, but we need to get going. And I think these are the boring, infrastructural, hard-working issues that we need to solve by digitization and not by inventing new apps or creating small things that we don't need that. We need something solid, something substantial that creates real value for our population.
Thanks, Andre. I really like what you said about policy making is technology and technology is policy making, so it's all become kind of integral to each other. I wasn't expecting before 10:30 the question of why did people vote for Brexit. I think we'll leave that for another conference. We'll leave that for a whole other
debate
conference.
or something. Yeah.
Or you can chat about that in the coffee break with somebody. But thank you. The importance of technology and trust really coming out there as well. Tamar, your thoughts on this before we go to questions?
Well, I'll start with the trust and technology. We had elections a few weeks ago, parliamentary elections. More than half of the votes were casted over the internet. We are the only country in the world who does general elections over the internet by digital means. But that demonstrates how the Estonian citizens trust the technology and the government. The most important political process, the elections, more than half of the population that participated casted the votes over the internet. So Estonia is known for digitalization and our society is very digitalized. So but an example that I wanted to mention today is what we've learned in the past few years in those constant crises that we are trying to implement in our everyday lives in policy making is the fact that Estonia, as a small country, we really cannot, the government cannot do it alone. We have to, everything we do, we have to do together with the private sector, with the civil society, with academia. This is how the digital society in Estonia has been built. And reacting to the COVID crisis, to the helping Ukraine now, the past crisis, different crises we've had, it has always been together with the civil society, private sector, academia. So now we are trying to implement that into policymaking as well in order, so what we're doing is developing, what we Estonians do is we develop digital platforms for co-creation policymaking. Both policy documents, legal acts are processed in one single information system, starting from when you initiate a policy, where you implement it, where you do ex post evaluation. Everything is in a single platform. Experts, civil servants, different stakeholders can participate, can contribute, and it's very transparent. You can see each contribution, who has asked the policy to be amended, which amendments have been implemented, which have been rejected, etc. So it's very transparent, inclusive. So this co-creation that we saw during the crisis, the aim is to replicate that now in policymaking as well, and using digital technologies to help to do that. And what we see that the difficult times ahead of us, that the inclusive society that this allows us to build will be more resilient to stand up to these difficult times ahead of us. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. I mean, really interesting what you say. Estonia, the only country in the world, I think, that allows voting via internet. Is that right? So the only country. So levels of trust in government and in that system incredibly high in Estonia, because you're such a digital kind of society. And interesting what you say there about that collaboration between private sector and citizens now being embedded into policy making and in the way that you co-create policies going forward. Thank you to all of you for setting the scene for us. It's now over to the audience. So anything that you've heard there, does this vision of policy making, a new type of policy making that's innovative, that embraces technology, that brings in citizens and the private sector, is that something that you recognise? Is that something that you're doing in your areas? Would you like to challenge any of that? Is that so not like you are doing it that you want to kind of question what's going on in your own area? Who would like to ask the first question? Yes, we've got a gentleman here, and then we've got a hand up there. Thank you. Do you want to say who you are and where you're from? I'm going to take both questions, okay? Thanks.
Hi, I'm Stephen. I work I'm a mathematical model in the Department of Health. And the team I work with uses innovative methods to synthesize evidence to support policy making. And half the time when I talk to the policymakers, they look absolutely terrified of what we're doing. How do we best sort of cross that divide to sort of communicate with policymakers sort of innovations and analytics that are sort of effectively supporting innovations in policymaking?
Yeah. So this goes back, so how do you kind of get policymakers to understand the benefit of data, of analytics, and to embed it into the policy-making process? And you in the Department of Health?
Yes.
You said, okay, so that's interesting, because I would have thought there you would be kind of more on the advanced end of the scale, but maybe not. Okay, so that's one question. Park that. How do you get policymakers to embrace kind of analytics and data? And then we have a question there, lady there. I'm also, do we have mics on the upper level? Yes, okay, so upper level as well. If you've got any questions, I'll be looking up there in a moment. Sorry, over to you.
Hi, I'm Michaela Brady. I work for DCIT, Department for Science, Technology, and Innovations, on the online safety bill. I had a question for Joyce, specifically about the free childcare scheme. I was wondering if the increased participation of the workforce also corresponds to any perceptions of gender in Malta changing, and how, rolling out this digital solution might also start to solve more systemic problems like prejudice.
Thank you. Okay, Joyce, I'm going to put that one to you first, because that was directed at you. So, does this help solve a bigger issue in society?
Well, culturally, the women in Malta were expected to look after their children, and the grandmothers were the main child carers when younger females entered into the workforce. But nowadays, those grandmothers are no longer available because they are most likely still working. And the policy was intended to reap the benefits of the investment in education, especially in STEM areas where we had many females who were graduating. So there wasn't really a strong gender bias in the education or employment field. It was a cultural thing that women opted to stay at home and look after their children. So I think that the policy was targeting them specifically, but even men are eligible if they are single parents. So it is linked to gender as a primary aim, but not actually gender biased negatively, because a bias can also be positive. That's why I'm making the qualification. So maybe you could look at it as a need of the economy, which was growing beyond the predicted outcomes, and we had to import employment workers, and we also had to see what resources were available in-house that could be tapped. And so this was also coupled with a tax incentive for women returnees. So it was a dual collaboration between the employment agency and the tax department. And I think that the benefit was this collaboration, which yielded the higher results.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to the question about data and policymakers embracing kind of data and analytics. Tamer, I'm going to come to you first.
It's quite complex question, of course. It's different levels, different layers, but well, important is, as with any new thing, is to educate people, to build up their skills. What we've learned, especially for the minister level, it's very important how you visualize data. It's how they consume data, the politicians. It's important for us to keep up with them, to make all this enormous amounts of data eatable for the politicians. So that's an important step. But all in all, it's we started this initiative in an Estonian government office as well, data-driven decision-making. And what we've seen is there's so many little things to do. You need to change your processes, legal acts. It's not only about technology, how you get the data. You think that Estonia is a very digitalized country, that we would have access to data in our decision-making. No, it's quite complex how to achieve that goal, that what we saw during the COVID times, that when we used data to make quick decisions on the third or fourth wave, we got it quite good. We got quite good on it, not in the beginning, but it's a complex thing. But step by step, you need to improve that.
So access to data, important, but also how you present it to policymakers, very important. Andre, you wanted to come in?
Well, I don't think we should, even the word data, access to data, no offense, but it just gets so, I don't think policymakers really want to listen to that. I think policymakers learn probably more about data and what can be done by technology just by trying out ChatGPT recently. Mm-hmm. Policymakers are way, maybe not in Estonia, but policymakers are generally thinking about people's lives and well-being and how to get votes. And if you look at a hospital, for instance, it was a question about health and using, I guess, artificial intelligence and data recognition. Now, if you look at a hospital right now, nowadays, it's different than when you looked at a hospital probably 10 or 15 years ago. There's a lot of problems there logistically. Ambulances are queuing outside with patients not being able to be admitted to the hospital. That's what policymakers are looking at. They're looking at scarce resources, and then they go, how am I going to solve that? If I can solve or at least mitigate that somehow, show me that. Don't talk about data, but show me how to do that. And then they might look at an airport that is optimized and works well with a lot of data flow. And then if you give them that example and say, we need to run hospitals just like we run an airport, and here we use data, then they might understand. But I seriously think we need to translate all this digitization and data talk and AI talk into political language, because otherwise they will not wake up. This is the nature of politicians. Sorry, but
it's interesting. Do you use the language of policy making and turn it all into their language, or do you actually expect policymakers to start to understand more digital language? Paul, over to you.
Yeah, it's so by policymakers, I'm going to assume you're saying ministers and also senior policy officials. So you're nodding, good. And I completely agree with that point around language. We are very often in our organisations use the same words and they have completely different meaning depending on which profession you're representing. There is a real danger, I think, in all of these brilliant discussions we have around innovation that we seep into such a degree of abstraction that it doesn't really, it's very hard to overcome some of the barriers. It's like a Tower of Babel. We're all sitting around the meeting thinking we're saying the same thing, and even data probably means different things to those people. I completely agree with what Andre is saying. I think I probably wouldn't advocate necessarily just the language of politics. I think it's around just finding whatever is the common Esperanto or whatever that we can all understand, being really clear when it doesn't make sense. I have personally found it easiest to make it tangible. So when you're trying to say what is the opportunity that data might present us here, tell a story where it's worked, create a product that is really what the person wants, and really start for you. We're all going to be using the language of user-centered design. Ministers and senior officials are a user of your product. So, be really rigorous. What do they need? What do they want? Get in their shoes. Understand the pressure they're under, the media, the public, the need to, yes, win votes, but also to deliver for the public. So that's how I've experienced it. Like in the Ukraine one, data was right at the heart of it. And because we'd done the basics that Andre is describing, when ministers wanted to know a question around, so how many people are where and where are they in the system, we could answer it. Suddenly you see, okay, this is a good thing. This is a tool. This is not some abstract thing that people are trying to describe we should be thinking about. We're doing it because it's there, it works, and I understand it.
I think you're all saying similar things in slightly different ways, that you have to present it in a way that's relevant for them. Would you add anything to that, Joyce?
Well, I concur with the idea that you need to tell a story and you need to show the balance. And sometimes the simplest story is the best story because it takes much more effort to explain something that's complex. Sometimes we think of innovation in policy making as the work of high tech or a lab. And I like to tell my team that it's always about looking at the old problems with fresh eyes and not being afraid to experiment. And using the data to design a story, as Paul was saying, is a very, very effective way to communicate to people who are not actually immersed in the situation. So,
thank you.
That's my take.
So thank you, Joyce. We have two questions over here, a hand there, and then there was somebody, if you keep your hands up, we'll get two mics there. And I'm just checking, does anybody in the upper level have a question? Is there a hand up there?
There's two of them.
No. Shout at me if I'm, yes. So if we can get some mics up there's some questions up there for the next couple of questions. So, do we want to take these two questions first? Thank you. Yes, gentlemen.
Sure, thank you. So I'm Simon Wilson, I work at EY Serum and work across central government as a lead service designer. So I'm really interested in some of these constraints that we've talked about. My question is about the objectives that are set from those policymakers that we talked about, so ministers and senior civil servants. And it sounds like, and from my experience, the best situations are where objectives are set, values are set, principles are set, and then we let the multidisciplinary teams get on with the how, and then that how is presented back, and we then use experimentation, design thinking to make it all happen. And we've heard a couple of examples of where that's worked really well in Homes for Ukraine and in other schemes. My question is about how we support the political system to make promises based on what we care about, what we value, what our objectives are and our outcomes are, and then let the great innovators in government get on with the how. So that's my question. How can we encourage the elephant in the room, which is that political context?
Great. So the first question there is, the politics set the what, but how do we then allow the innovators across the public sector to work on the how? And then there was this question there, just behind you.
How are you doing? Is my voice carry okay?
Just there it is, the mic. There, thanks.
Is it on?
Yes.
I thought I'd try it without the mic, because I figured if John Wesley preached here 200 years ago, the acoustics might be quite good. And I didn't like the echo the young lady mentioned over there. My questions are really straightforward now, right? So if big companies like Amazon, and it's not an if, they do it, they use big data to deliver a seamless kind of algorithm that encourages what they need from a business perspective, which is you buy more stuff, in a way that makes you think, oh, that's good, they care, they know I like this, or that kind of slipper, or this sort of television, right? We know what that service looks like, and other companies do it, usually private sector. What do the panel think a kind of a government or policy example of that sort of like world-class business plan using big data would look like for a public service? The Secretary of State for Government in Estonia might have some examples. I know we've got someone from private sector as well, and some other policymakers. I'd be keen to hear what you might think that would look like. Thank you.
Thank you. So the question is, we kind of are familiar with big companies using data in a way and creating algorithms to encourage us to buy certain things. How does the public sector use some of that technology, AI for example, and what algorithms are being used already? Maybe some examples there. Great. I'm going to ask you to answer one or both of those questions. So do you want to answer the question on how do you get the politics out of the how, and then what algorithms are used across the public sector? Joyce, I'm going to come to you first.
Well, it's usually the politician that sets the direction and the targets, and I think it's the role of the public officer to actually convince that the direction is correct. But many times we are presented with a public commitment that we can only shift slightly, because ultimately the public commitment of the politician with the citizens is our recipe to work on. So I'm not being fatalistic at all, because I am one that who tends to argue and discuss to try to direct the process of policy making to achieve the what of the politician in the right way. I always find that the sustainability element of the process and the ultimate aim is very effective in implicating the process of how you're going to get where you want to get. So I think that it's a task that we all need to fine-tune the skills to be able to manage, rather than expect data or technology to just do it for us.
Yeah, so sometimes the ministers will want to get involved in the how as well, and I guess it's part of the civil service role to try and get that balance right. Paul, both one or both of those?
No, I'm not going to do the algorithms. I'm just going to pick up on that point. So by and large, we are all in this room unelected officials. We are here to deliver what politicians and ministers want ultimately. The way you were describing it as kind of an elephant in the room, and in a kind of almost like I don't see it in any way, shape or form as negative. I think everything that I need to do as a civil servant needs to be grounded in that kind of democratic principle, where politicians are doing, as we've said, why are we doing this? The broad, what are we doing? And then I completely agree with you that the how is really powerful when we get on and we innovate in that space. The challenge I guess I'd throw to the room is I think sometimes we are over censoring. So if you think about it, you're right, completely right. Sometimes ministers do want to get and really understand and be quite managerial around some aspects of it. I think sometimes we've allowed ourselves to be a bit infantilized with that, if I'm being completely honest, and not to start saying, right, okay, I'm a public servant. I've been given my political marching orders. I've got some creativity and some innovation. If you're a manager in this room, how are you behaving to your colleagues around setting that expectation that in terms of the how, we should innovate? The only thing I would say, it is obviously a lot easier when you've got a minister who is there and giving you that space. So we were very lucky on the Homes for Ukraine. We have very, very experienced ministers like Michael Gove who were kind of setting us that shape. But I also think that the colleagues that we had across government, in the private sector, in local government, in the community sector, they did seize it. That was what was really gratifying. So I think it is up to us to take advantage of that space that exists and not see that kind of democratic process as an elephant in the room or something. It's how the system works and how in the system we need to operate in.
So have that confidence that a core part of what civil service does is to put the options for the how forward. Andre Tamar, did you want to go more on the algorithm question?
I think the big data question is interesting. I think both questions are actually interesting. The big data thing, yes, Amazon is doing a lot. Chinese companies are doing a lot. I think you have to be very careful as a government to how much you will go into that space, because very often you will be considered doing surveillance of some sort, and I think what population right now really needs is access to own data, own health data, own data about properties, what the government has about you. And then I think there's a great interest in what the gentleman asked about, the health area. If we can do diagnosis of diseases based on artificial intelligence, that's not big data more, that's more statistical data, and anonymous, of course. I think that will be appreciated by a lot of people, that we can be better at diagnosing diseases. And when it comes to encouraging politicians, I think you need to find some blockbuster cases. Some of them are really boring. Like, for instance, digital consent. If I could give digital consent to someone doing something for me, maybe we can get rid of, or at least somehow answer those 20% of the population being very skeptical towards digitization, which is the case in any society right now. So we have 20% of people out there being extremely skeptical about any type of digitization. And they need help to do many daily things that they were doing manually before. So we have to address that in parallel as well. And I think digital consent will save billions in a society.
There are huge discrepancies between countries, I think, and for example in the UK, a lot of resistance against digital IDs, whereas some countries, they already have digital IDs. So, Tamar, your thoughts on government and big data?
Data, yes. The easiest path, of course, to do what the Amazon does and etc., is to shut down the data protection agency, and then the governments can do the same. Nobody laughed, so I have to say that this was a joke. But again, what technology allows you to do, it allows you to build transparency and trust. We in Estonia, we call it Big Brother reversed. Is that the citizens, the people in Estonia can go to the state portal, and there's a link where they can see which government agency has access with your data, which doctor has access to your health data. Technology leaves a track, a trace, a log. So you can use this to get rid of or lesser the fear we have on the use of technology. And then we need to discuss with the citizens on what is allowed for the government to do with the data. And these discussions they're going to take a very long time. Certain concrete cases in Estonia, it took 10 years to change the laws to allow the government to use some data in order to make the lives of citizens easier. We have concrete cases, so but we need this discussion, and we can call it the social contract, what the government is allowed to do with your data, but we need this discussion in order to maintain the trust that the citizens have, that you don't misuse your data, and develop government services in order to offer people better services.
Thanks, Tamar. I can see there are hands going up on the data issue. I think people are really interested in that. But I did say I would go up there, so let's see how many we can get in. So do we have a mic up here? There were two hands, I think, up in the corner near each other. Thanks. I mean, one of the key things in Estonia, as you say, is the transparency, so people know exactly which agency is holding what data, and that's always been central to the approach, I think, in Estonia to build that trust. Okay, question up here. Sorry, I couldn't quite catch that question. Could you, I think the mic's a bit muffling the question. Could you repeat that question again?
Sorry. Is there any adjustments available for people who don't know how to use technology?
So the risk of digital exclusion. So what adjustments for people who don't know how to use the technology or can't, for whatever reason, use the technology. Thank you. Really, we'll hold that question. And then another hand up there, I think. Or is it? No? Just one up there. Okay, let's do that one quickly, and then we'll come back to the questions down here. So the risk of kind of, in this new world, creating a new excluded group, people who don't embrace technology. Tamer, I'll start with you, because so many people in Estonia do embrace the technology.
Well, we started with 20 years ago already with these programs to help people with digital literacy, and it was a private sector, public sector cooperation, because a lot of private sector, like banks and everything, telcos, they went digital as well, so they were interested in investing in that as well. But then, those people who don't use digital services, then you need to they need to have their own way, so they can either get help. In Estonia, it's libraries where you can get help for using digital services in the countryside, or in like with voting, you cannot get rid of paper voting. It's when they choose to vote on paper, they must have that right. So that goes with certain other digital services as well.
Thanks, Tamer. So you have a parallel approach of keeping the alternative, making sure that's still in place, but also trying to help upskill people so that they can use the technology. Paul?
Yeah, and I think it comes back to, this is true of everything. All of the services we design have to have the users at their heart. And there is a real danger, I think, sometimes we all go, right, it's all digital, and we end up doing a bunch of stuff for our own administrative convenience. And I think that's the shift that needs to happen in government. And we do need, all the things we were hearing there about getting people into the digital world. But I think it's really important that we as policymakers don't think everyone's like us, don't think everyone has the same access, and abides by that principle. The thing is, the world is changing. All of these things that we're talking around, we are trying to construct public services and policies. If I'm being completely honest, we in this country, we are doing it with a Victorian system. Many of the systems so I think it is tricky, and I think the key for me in everything that we do, really, I'm completely sold on the idea that we put the users at the heart of it. We understand that different people will have different needs and requirements, and that we do understand that we need to deliver services that are for that deliver the services our users want, not just for our own convenience.
Yeah, hugely important. I mean, increasingly I'm helping my parents, and they're not particularly old with a lot of services. Joyce?
Yes. Well, it's a reality, and it has to be catered for. And we have several services that are born digital, so you need to be able to access the technology and the service. We have targeted this situation through the agency service.gov. It has several hubs where if you need assistance to access digital services, you can go there. You can be assisted by an agent, which you give power of attorney at the moment for, and you can also be assisted to learn how to do it yourself. And then for the very, very vulnerable, like elderly people and also people with disability, we have an agency which is called FITA, which is the Foundation for IT Accessibility, and they support people to acquire software that gives them access, like for people with vision impairment, and they can get special technology at reduced prices so that they are not left behind. In fact, it is something that we pride ourselves on having succeeded in doing well, because the numbers are decreasing of the people who are attending these centers once they are assisted to learn how to access the digital services.
Thank you. Andre, I'm not going to ask you to answer that one because I think we're in danger of repeating each other, but in the 20 seconds that left, the gentleman there, Andre, I'm going to ask you, whatever he asks, you're going to answer this.
Oh, that's an easy one.
Hi, thanks for listening to my question. Specifically for Joyce, so...
You just ruined it, never mind.
I'm a civil service fast streamer, and I'm currently placed in my first year at the Department for Work and Pensions, and I'm working on the in-work progression project, which is part of obviously the recent spending review, and I'm particularly interested, of course, in Joyce's policy that she's pointed out in Malta regarding childcare. Obviously, childcare is a big barrier for many women in the UK to also get into work, but not just get into work, but progressive work, to do more hours as well. So I was wondering specifically with that policy, how long did it take to get a net return from it? Just in terms of like from start to finish, how long did you start to see that positive return financially in total?
Thanks. And Joyce, sorry, we are minus time.
Sorry.
So
Okay, I'll be very quick. The first 2-3 years were a bit challenging because we needed to have also governance systems in place. But ultimately, with the investment by the private sector in childcare, with the employment created through child carers, the local training institutions also designed childcare accredited qualifications. The overall return to the economy was bigger than just the women returnees to the workplace. And as I said before, the biggest gap was the lack of workforce that we really needed. So I think, I don't have statistics, so I stand to be corrected. But after the third year, we were seeing significant increase on the workforce and also in the investment being made in the different childcare centres all over the country and in the number of people graduating from MCAST in childcare services management and childcare minding, child minding.
Brilliant. Well, sadly, we are at the end of time for that session. Please join me in thanking Paul, Joyce, Andre, and Tamar